Hi, welcome to the Caregiver Conference. My name is Mary Elaine Petrucci. I'm the host of the Caregiver Conference, and I'm glad that you're here today. And my special guest is Helen Scherrer-Diamond, who will be discussing how to pre-plan to face the unthinkable. And before we get to talk to Helen about what that really means, I would like to introduce Helen to you. Helen works as a community outreach director who offers a diverse and highly skilled background. She was born in Philadelphia and earned her degree in business administration and communications at Muhlenberg College in Allington, Pennsylvania. Working at Honeywell during school vacations, and then later at an internship at IBM while she was in college, Helen was hired as an administrative assistant upon graduation and worked directly with the sales department. With her IT knowledge, sales skills, and understanding of the internet, Helen was recruited by Pennsylvania Blue Shield and later promoted to supervisor over 8 women in group insurance. Pursuing her career, Helen became self-employed with a marketing company which served many small businesses in the metro Atlanta area. With changes in the advertising industry, Helen accepted a position as marketing specialist with a Mass Mutual agency. With management changes, Helen left and became an estate planning representative with a local legal firm, helping families understand the importance of estate planning legal documents. Having lost her parents by age 28, Helen learned the importance of pre-planning for the inevitable. She obtained her Georgia Life and Health Insurance license and helps educate the community about planning ahead and making pre-planning resources available to the people that she serves. Welcome to Caregiver Conference.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here, Mary Elaine. Thank you for having me.
Most definitely. I think this is one topic that's really hard for people to A, think about, and B, plan for. So I'm glad that you're here to give us some great information so that this process can be a little less threatening and I don't know, anxiety provoking. So let's start. When you say facing the unthinkable, what do you actually mean?
I am actually referring to facing our mortality or the idea of death and dying. But over the years, I find that people don't want to talk about death. They just want to, they don't want to talk about it because they're scared. They want to talk about it because they want their loved ones to know their decisions.
Mm-hmm.
By putting it in writing, I think they may cause something to, they think I may cause something to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I usually use levity and I tell them I don't have that kind of power to cause their death, and they usually laugh and relax.
Mm-hmm.
People need to have the conversation with their loved ones and realize their own mortality and make
Mm-hmm.
their own decisions, and they need to put it in writing.
I think that's really extremely important because you don't want to have a loved one have to make those final arrangements when they're going through that grieving process.
Correct. And I want to say that facing the unthinkable also means while they're alive to make the decisions if suddenly they become incapacitated.
That's even a much better point. I mean, that could happen to us at any point. We could have a stroke, we could be hit by a car. There's so many things that are really could happen, and to be prepared as much as possible is great advice. So what do you mean when you refer to avoiding crisis mode?
I want people to recognize how they can plan ahead for the important decisions before they're put into an uncomfortable position of having to make those decisions under stress or not even being able to make their own critical decisions. I want
Mhm.
people to understand how they can truly avoid the stress and problems associated with their own death, but also with their own capacity, which we just talked about a little
Mhm.
bit. People
Mhm.
could face a crisis by having the resources available ahead of time. And people can plan ahead for the incompetency, like you mentioned, a stroke, mental or physical disability, Alzheimer's, dementia, as well as for their death.
Again, I totally agree with you, because I feel like being more prepared and having everything in place just makes it much easier for the caregiver, and for so that they can, grieve the way they should, instead of having to be forced into making decisions about funeral services. So, Helen, tell us what you mean by pre-planning. Who asks you about pre-planning their funeral, and why?
It's a great question, Mary Elaine. Over the years, I've dealt with couples and individuals that have reached out to me, whether they're in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. I usually had the pleasure of meeting them at a networking event or a meeting or a program, and they remember me from the information I shared. When they are ready to face their own mortality and they recognize they may face the unthinkable, they'll call me, text me, email me to get further information, or to actually schedule an appointment to meet. They're finally at a point in their life when they're ready and they want to make their own decisions, put it in writing, and pay ahead of time to make it easier and less stressful for their loved ones who are left behind. They've also learned that pricing increases over time, and plan ahead, certain costs are locked into place and will not increase in price. So it helps them and it helps their loved ones.
Most definitely. I think when my parents were being really proactive, in the sense that once my brother passed away, they purchased all the, their coffins and the plots and everything. So there was nothing for me to really have to worry about, which I did appreciate. So I know exactly what you're saying.
Very good.
And so why do people pre-plan their funerals, and why do they buy cemetery plots?
That's a great question. People usually pre-plan because they know what they want, where they want to be remembered, and because they want to make it easier for their loved ones. Sometimes it's because it was made easier for them.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they plan ahead because their final remains will not be local. I think that's really important too, to remember that sometimes you're planning in another state or another country. Sometimes they plan ahead when they want to have different other than their spouse or their children want for them. In other words, they want to be cremated rather than buried, or buried rather than be cremated. And so they purchase ahead of time just to be sure and put in writing for what their wishes are.
Mm-hmm.
Cemetery chosen may be in that other state or country, and they know to plan ahead.
Most definitely. Um, so what options do people have when they're preparing for their passing? What options do people have at that point?
They really have a lot of options, and what they need to do is make their own decisions. They can either make their own plans ahead of time or leave all the details to the loved ones. We have lots of options like burial in the ground, entombment in a mausoleum, cremation
Mm-hmm.
where the cremains go into an urn or they go into a niche, or they could even be buried. And there's also green burials nowadays where people choose to have their bodies interred in the ground directly.
Mm-hmm.
Death occurs away from home, pre-planned arrangements can also be honored. We work with various consulates in other countries, and we work with the funeral homes and cemeteries in all states. We're trying our best to help the people know the information and resources ahead of time.
That's really remarkable that you have like all those connections in all 50 states and with consulates around the world. I think that makes me feel a whole lot better about should anything happen if I'm overseas. So most definitely, I think the listeners would really appreciate knowing that you have that ability, so they don't have to really worry should something happen if they're out of state or out of the country.
Thank you, because the paperwork that's involved,
I can imagine.
recognize we worry about passports, but let alone all the other paperwork that's involved in bringing a loved one back.
I'm sure there's lots of paperwork. Why is it important to put your wishes in writing and pay ahead of time? How does that help the caregiver?
I appreciate you asking. There's so much to this, but the options, once they're made, are very simple and you put in writing. It's important to have the conversation first with the right people that you trust and put in writing, because your decisions are what you want, not what someone else wants for you. And that might apply even to a spouse. They might want something different than what you want. It's important to put in writing in case the person you choose to be in charge may not be alive anymore. You need an alternate person too. We find over the years that people don't recognize how important the powers of attorney are with the named people you trust and the alternate. The new person in charge may not be the person you chose and may not honor what you really wanted all along. We also see that families make these important decisions all the time, and it might not be where they feel comfortable. They feel the financial stress, or they feel the decision-making stress. If you don't choose a power of attorney, also we want you to know that the first person that you choose might be chosen by probate court. We need to have those powers of attorney done while we're alive to name the right people that we trust and an alternate. Otherwise, the state might step in. Attorneys might step in. They might waste your money that you've been working so hard for over the years. So I always try to remember to tell people that you don't want others to get involved in your business. One of the things I can bring up with is all these celebrities that should have known ahead of time with all the assets and money they have. Why should the states step in and have to assign somebody? Or why should their state go to lawyers when the documents, the estate planning, legal documents, wills, trusts, powers of attorney could have already been in place? I'm not an attorney. I just advise people to please go to an attorney and make sure you have the legal documents, not local, legal documents. They do have to be local.
Yes, they do.
By county, and they have to be by your state of residence.
Exactly. Thank you for pointing out that difference. Yes, I would imagine that it would be to everybody's benefit, including the person who, passes, to be not only, yes, people should respect what their wishes are, and they also should be respectful of the people who will be providing services and the family that's left behind, just so that, the family doesn't have to worry about making all those final arrangements or trying to get a loved one back from out of state or overseas. And whatever they can do to solve some of those decision-making during a crisis when they're so emotional at that point, I would think would be very beneficial to both the person who's making those arrangements and those who are left behind. So great advice. So what is the difference between a funeral service and a graveside service? I think I know what that is, but please go ahead.
I appreciate being asked that because there really is a lot of questions that I get about that. A funeral service may include a formal service at a place of worship or at the funeral home of your choice. A graveside service is a formal service right at the cemetery where your cemetery plot, crypt, or niche is located. Some people, based on their religious beliefs, decide what they want to have done and what they prefer to have done. Some people, based on their age, may want direct cemetery service because they feel that many people will attend at their that not many people will attend at their place of worship, or because they feel so many people are no longer there for them. Some people may want to spend the money on a formal service at their place of worship because of their loved ones and to celebrate their life. And it might also be at a funeral home. And then loved ones may also decide when and where if the person doesn't decide for themselves. So,
Yes, and then you may have a lot of disagreement about that depending on the family involved. So I know this is kind of a crazy question, I'll admit, but so what are all the legal, local government regulations that people have to be buried in a cemetery or in a crypt or a niche? Why can't they just put them in their backyard, for example?
it's a good question. And you know, down south here, I get a lot of questions about putting them in their pickup truck. Not to be disrespectful, but
Mhm.
literally to say that we do have laws. So people really can bury in their backyard, but not in certain states like Indiana, California, and Washington state, because it is based on your laws of the state. What I have seen over the years is that most states will allow, but the procedures have to be followed. The details need to be followed in order to close down a social security number and avoid identity theft. There are reasons
Okay.
for having a funeral director involved. The idea is in order to close a social security number, a death certificate is needed. And a death certificate can only be given by a funeral director or the person that says they're acting as a funeral director in conjunction with the medical doctor or medical examiner who pronounced the deceased as dead. The only people that can issue a death certificate are the ones that would help with the Social Security Administration being notified of the death with the formal paperwork. And that's why I want people to recognize the paperwork that's involved is so important, because we recognize we don't want anything illegal to happen to our loved ones that are left behind. So do it right. Do it through a funeral director and your doctor or medical examiner if, gosh forbid, there's an autopsy.
Wonderful.
And
The
I'm not
reason,
a lawyer. The biggest thing for everyone to understand is I'm not a lawyer. I just have experience and seen and heard and read and understand and was trained to please be careful what you're doing with a loved one.
no, I think that's really a great point, because I know when I was working in rural eastern Colorado, would go down a highway and I would see cemetery plots right near the roadway. So I guess that was legal when Colorado was first made a state. I'm not really sure, but that was interesting to me to see that there was actual family plots close to the road, but I mean, and then kind of enclosed as a way to, memorialize the people that had lived in that house. I'm assuming it was like a generational family activity that they may have been involved in. So yes, I've seen it, but I've never had the opportunity to ever make that kind of decision. So how can people pre-plan and avoid crisis mode for their loved ones?
Everyone should really contact a person like me, a licensed, certified agent, by calling, emailing, texting, or meeting with someone like me. Most people fear the idea, but they feel relief once the decisions are made and put in writing. And most people will pay in full or set up a payment plan to pay for their arrangements. The state of Georgia, where I'm licensed for final expense insurance, also guarantees transfer of pre-planned arrangements to other funeral homes. That's another very important thing to know, Mary Elaine. We're finding that, we're very global nowadays. And so we just want people to understand that arrangements can be transferred. Also, everyone's wishes are unique, so I recommend putting your wishes in writing ahead of time, no matter what age you are. Remember, I lost my parents when I was age 28. My had passed away from a major cancer, and my dad from a second massive heart attack. And I was 28 years old, but they were so smart. They were immigrants and they had everything in place. They were legal citizens and they had all their documents in place, all their final arrangements in place. It made it so much easier for my brother and myself. He's 3 years younger than me. And it was a blessing that they thought of us ahead of time, no matter how young you are.
That's a good point, because when I was working for a neurorehabilitation company, I guess this young person went on vacation, and he was a near drowning victim, and his company's insurance policy, health insurance policy, was in the top drawer at his desk at work, and he never signed it.
Oh, right.
So I kind of understand it from that point of view as well, because the services that he could receive then for his head injury weren't really available to him at that point, which is really sad. So I know just from personal and just from work experience, the same as you, that it's always good to have all the paperwork signed in human resources, wherever, just so that you can take care of yourself. Because like you said, it doesn't matter how young you are, you could have an accident and become incapacitated, and who's going to make decisions for you?
Right.
Then you're left with the state.
Estate planning, legal documents in place ahead of time. And you were talking about even with beneficiaries and knowing ahead of time who gets what. The whole idea is that people don't usually look at their documents, and it is very important to get them witnessed and notarized. And your state, county by state, you'll figure out with your attorney what to do. But the whole idea also is, if, gosh forbid, something happens while you're alive. Thank you for bringing that up. It's not always about death.
No, it really isn't. And I'm glad that you've been pointing out the difference as well. So I know you brought up a little bit about health insurance being in place, or pre-planning being in place. Heaven forbid if you pass away out of state or in another country. So can you give us an idea of what really is involved in that process?
Thank you. We're talking a little bit about protection if, gosh forbid, the unthinkable happens and you're out of a state or you're out of a country. We see families spending thousands of dollars to bring a loved one's body back. So I just want to share with everyone that we do have a plan, a protection plan through a major worldwide company that would allow the person to just use an 800 number with their loved one, getting a card and calling this company, and everything is put in place. In other words, the documentation from that country, the death certificate, it is a protection plan if you, gosh forbid, died 75 miles or more away from home. And we have found it has been a lifesaver. There are certain people that don't recognize that airlines have to plan ahead for even bringing a body back. And a casket has to be found for bringing that body back from a cruise liner or from a country. Or if you're in another state, what does that family member do? So we just want you to know we can help with that. And the paperwork that's involved when you die with a death certificate or the passport or any of the country's papers that they would need to allow the funeral director to bring back that body, it can be very involved. So we just want to share how we can help with that as well. I can help with that as well.
Of course, Helen. I know you can help with a lot of things, and I appreciate that. So if somebody didn't have this in traveler's insurance, for example, can you give us kind of a ballpark how much it would cost to bring a body back from overseas, and two, how long would it take to get a body back from overseas?
Well, it can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 we've seen just to bring the body back. That's not to have the funeral service or the cemetery service. We just want you to share with your audience that the length of time depends on the country and their paperwork that's involved, when and how quickly the death certificate could be gotten from overseas. And sometimes there's language barriers. I hate to say that, but it's the truth. So it does depend on the time of the death and how quickly an airline can be found, a casket can be found, the paperwork can be processed, and it has to be a body refrigerated.
Correct.
Or embalmed.
Okay.
Other thing, we're very careful about people's religious beliefs.
That's very, very important. I would agree that religious accommodations need to be made. Now, if somebody does pass away overseas, does a family member have to go overseas in order to secure all these documents, or does the insurance carrier take care of that?
The Inman Shipping Travel Protection Plan takes care of everything to bring the body back. If the family chooses to go, that's something different.
Okay.
But a one-time charge of $450 for the rest of their life, they can have that protection. That does not include coverage for the funeral, the cemetery, and the family members in the airline. It only includes for the deceased person.
Okay. You've given us a lot of information about how to pre-plan to face the inevitable. Are there any closing words that you would like to offer our audience?
I appreciate it. I just want people to recognize that there are a lot of resources out there and a lot of people that want to help. It's a matter of you doing for yourself and putting it in writing. Just making sure you have the right conversations with the right people you trust. And remember that as time passes, things can always change. They don't have to be in stone. We're just trying to help people to recognize to do it ahead of time. And then as life changes, make those changes. Make sure you look at your legal documents. Make sure you look at the insurance policy that's for your final expense. Make sure you look at the arrangements. Make sure you know that you're in a different state or you're in a different country.
Mm-hmm.
That you have to use lawyers that are applicable in that state or that country.
You have my head swimming, Helen. Thank you very much. That's a lot to think about. I mean, I was really, like I said, fortunate that my parents had prepaid for their graves and their caskets and, you know, things like that. So I didn't have to worry about it, and it made it so much easier. And
They
it just
loved you.
well, it reduced my stress level because I had so much to plan for. So I really appreciate all the valuable information you've given us today. And I know that you have a free offer and you have a PDF that discusses facing the unthinkable. Can you explain a little bit more about that, Helen?
Yes, I can send information, and I also offer a 30-minute consultation. I want people to do the right things for their loved ones and for themselves. So I share information documents about even veterans information because there are a lot of growing needs, and the PDFs can be shared. I suggest by your state that you go to an estate planning attorney. That way they can help you with the documents. They might be able to help you with the veterans benefits. As seniors are going and getting older and wiser, and we're all living longer,
Mm-hmm.
just need to do things ahead of time.
That's amazing. So thank you for giving us that 30-minute consultation. And you were also saying that you could help our listeners with the traveler's insurance if the loved one
Correct.
passes in another country or another state.
Correct. I can help them with this protection coverage any state in the United States. It's called Inman Shipping Travel Protection Plan, and I'd be honored to help anyone.
Thank you very much, Helen. This was just an amazing presentation. I've learned a lot more about the difference between the unthinkable and the inevitable, and just being really respectful not only of what you want when you pass, but also helping your family so that they can, you know, go through that grieving process, knowing that you've already taken care of everything for them.
Thank you so much for having me. I love educating and learning myself, so I've learned a lot from all your speakers.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very fortunate to have speakers like yourself that are providing valuable information because I know that I want caregivers to understand that they need to have the certain things in place, like all those legal documents, have the funeral arrangements completed, and do it beforehand. I think I'm just trying to bring awareness to caregivers so that they can make better informed decisions now before the unthinkable happens. So thank you for that term. I'll be using that quite a bit, Helen.
Very
So thank
good.
you again.
Thanks for allowing me to help avoid crisis.
Very good. I'll keep those two terms in mind. Thank you.